LEC Finals is upon us. We've watched a full year now of LEC. I don't even know if we can call it a full year considering how little games they played in summer and how many breaks we had, but a full year by the context of what the LEC currently is of League of Legends. And we've had a clear top four fighting back and forth. In winter, we had, of course, KC with the miraculous run after losing to G2 in the upper bracket. They made it all the way to the finals, of course, beating FNATIC ahead of that 3-2 in that final game where we saw the misfortune Lulu and the Volibear run it down mercilessly, and the Silas getting solo killed by the Aurora after getting griefed in the lane after that level 1 plan. And then, of course, in spring, where KOI also lost to G2 and then made that medical run and beat G2 in the finals. There seems to be a pattern. There seems to be a trend. G2 now for the third time in the finals in summer after beating, of course, KOI in the upper bracket and beating KC. They beat all of their opponents and now are in the finals once again. Is it a team that is going to do the lower bracket run, and are they going to be upset? Or will G2 finally win a split? FNATIC, of course, the odd one out because they haven't made a single finals. And they were the only team out of the top four that actually made a change in the roster by bringing in Poby and removing, of course, Humanoid. Setting the stage for the summer split, there was a long break for the teams that weren't involved in the internationals. KOI and G2 got international experience, and they got a summer split almost designed for the purpose of letting them chill. They got a lot of breaks, got to digest it, and now that extra practice is really paying off, because usually when you went to MSI, you came back and you had that fatigue and everyone kind of came after you and you needed to recover quickly. And some teams managed to do so, and some teams did not manage to do so. But G2 and KOI, very happy. They are already in top 3, which means that they are at the World Championship, regardless of the outcome this weekend. For KC and FNATIC, it's not quite the same. The biggest stakes match isn't going to be the finals. It is going to be this one between KC and FNATIC, because they are fighting for the last world spot and, of course, a continuation of being in the LEC playoffs and fighting for the only trophy that the LEC is given out. For both of these organizations, it will be a massive disappointment to not make it at the beginning of the year. I think it would be bigger for FNATIC, but after what KC did in winter, winning a split and then also having a pretty successful first stand, regardless of how Mickey Mouse that tournament is, it would be a massive disappointment for them to not make the World Championship. KC's year has not been drama-free. There's been conversation about also Niski coming in. They had him at a sub, and there was questioning about Vladi's, work ethic and how hard he, works within the team. And there was a lot of question marks in terms of how they divide scrims back and forth. But Vladi has kept playing all the matches on stage for Karmine Corp. Let's break down the matchup. Kana versus Oscarin. Kana is the far better player, better laner, better team fighter, better across the board, better in sync with the team. I think that Kana plays better with his teammates. I think that Kana is the more complete player, and I do think that Kana is an MVP candidate. I think it's very easy to describe Kana because he has very few flaws. He even has, the capacity to play tanks, even if it comes down to it. And I think the limitations of Kana come with the limitations of KC rather than himself. I think Kana is just a strong player all around. Oscarinin has struggled. I think that Oscarinin, the way he bases and syncs up with his bot lane, isn't really there. He's had lane matchups where he has become a straight liability. Sometimes when he tries to play the carries, it doesn't look great. It looks horrible, in fact, especially that KOI series was one that is tough to forget in terms of his performance. Against GX was okay. I think it was good that he picked up Rek'Sai, which I think is a very useful champ for him. He can play the K'Sante, Rek'Sai, and stabilize the matchup. That's good. The main thing here is that we've seen new methods of lane swapping, and maybe this is something that FNATIC can utilize to make Kana less impactful. But I don't know how likely that is, because in regular lane swaps, in terms of basing and being in sync with your bot lane, it's all about basing at the same time, leveraging TP to get like positional advantages and so forth. If this is something that they have learned, then great. But they haven't even utilized that form of a lane swap to get any advantages in game, because that is a good way of activating your bot lane and snowballing even further in the game. and FNATIC don't like doing this at all. They are playing very old school in their approach, and that is hoping they get match lanes in bot lane. They keep pressing as, you know, a trio with jungle, support, and AD. In a lot of cases, that works and it's good enough. But in terms of how FNATIC incorporate Oscarinin and their solo lanes in general, this is a big problem for them, especially in terms of how they progress the game, because a lot of top laners, especially in the top 4, tend to be more impactful than Oscarinin. Oscarinin makes some weird comments in his interviews about when he's motivated, when he's good, and when's not. I want to highlight that in winter, I do think that Oscarinin carried FNATIC. So there's occasions where Oscarinin plays good. They are very rare, but he has it in him on occasion. Maybe he gets like some nice poppy angles or nice rumble angles, and then maybe he can do something. This is the time to do so, because obviously this best of 5 is career defining for all of these players. Jungle, Razork, I think that in terms of early game is much better than Yike because of his cooperation with Mickey. I think early game, they drive it super well. FNATIC get good advantages in the early game. It's just the lane swapping aspect that is a little bit iffy, but I do think that like Razork on Javan and these early game champions is very creative and good. That is his biggest strength. Yike, I do think that on KC looks similar to what he did on G2 now, kind of uninspired, uninteresting in the way he plays. I do think that the series against Vitality was fine, but then again, it's like me taking too much away from FNATIC series against GX or KC's Vitality series. I think that these opponents are just on a whole different level in terms of what the expectations are, and you can get away with so much more. Yike's biggest strengths currently, I would say, is in the team fighting, and I do think that KC is a little bit more recipe based than what they need and should expect from the jungler. I do think that Yike should be playing more of a Shadow-esque style, meaning like he plays engage champions, so he can set up, you know, Kana, Vladi, and Kalist to carry. And I think it's the same thing for Targamas. They should be playing setup in these positions. Whether it's, you know, as simple as KC just looking in the trees again with the Maokai and the Ivan, I think that's a very valid strategy. Playing the Javan for the engage, Vi, Pantheon if it's allowed, then I think that's like a solid strategy for KC to make jungle useful, because they just need to kind of withhold the storm. Something that we see globally on top of those lane swap things that I mentioned is that a lot of junglers just level 2 and 3 ganking. Owner is doing it perma, Tarzan is doing it perma, Kanabi is doing it perma, and Yike was doing it when he was performing his best in winter. When they beat top esports, we saw level 2 ganks, 3 ganks, 4 ganks, and they kind of activated the bot lane. And I do think that they should go for a similar approach with KC, because I do think that if KC have prior bot lane, I do think that FNATIC just lose on the spot. But that is, of course, a tough thing to do because they are very strong in bot lane, and FNATIC expect a challenge in that position. Mid lane, Vladi and Poby, I do think that there is a very, you know, clear shared pool of champions here. Orianna, Azir, Talia, Ryze, and then, of course, for Vladi, there's Yone. I do think that Poby should do his best to trim away at that pool, because I do think that if mid lane turns into like a supportive, more like roam style, I do think that Poby could maybe do better there. That's the best version of Poby I saw with Vincenzo in T1. So I hope to see that side of Poby a little bit more. I think if he plays maybe a good Galio, prepares Galio for this best of 5, I think that could be very nice. Because I do think on the flip side, Vladi is probably the most isolated player on this team. If you open the map and you just target Vladi and target his economy, he plays alone most of the time. You can really shut him out of the game. You can target him and hit him hard. I do think that Vladi has a very limited champion pool in what he's effective on. He tried to incorporate, you know, more melees, can maybe play an Akali on some spots. I just don't think Sylas is in a great spot right now. I think Akali can be fine, but I do think that Vladi, just because he plays so isolated, wants to play something that is strong 1v1, and of course can farm on its own, because when he gets to those team fights, plays super well, but in terms of playing the roam style, supportive style, this is something that KC has struggled with the entire last 2 splits in my mind. When it comes to the bot lane, I do think that FNATIC lane better. I think Kalist is a fantastic player when it comes to, of course, the team fighting, and mechanically is very good. I do think that plain and simple FNATIC's bot lane is just better. If there's a clear edge here for FNATIC, it is the bot lane. While I think that the top side has a higher ceiling for KC, in my opinion. I think the main danger for FNATIC is in terms of how they played their mid to late game, they don't really progress the game outside of team fights. They don't really give themselves a lot of options, and I think that they're very stiff in the way they approach the game. And that is the main criticism I have towards KC too, that they're too stiff. And the big reason why KOI and G2 are better than both of these two teams is the fact that they are a lot more, present in terms of how they manage side lanes, and they give themselves options. It's like they play the dragons wide enough, like over a 1 minute span, where they set up top lane in a way and pressure top lane in a way that you have the option to commit top side, get a tier 1, tier 2, and get economy for the trade of dragon. So the power dynamic over information becomes a lot more different, because then the enemy needs to think, should we defend? Should we send this many people to Drake? What is the next action of the enemy? While KC and FNATIC show on vision, and they go 5-man towards that Drake, and they simplify and streamline their gameplay. But in this particular matchup, both of these teams are quite bad at the same thing. Kana is very good at setting up the side lane, so I do think that's an edge that Kana can do this on his own. But FNATIC and KC will be decided in those team fights. So you can skew your draft towards a little bit more scaling, because it should be a lot less punishing to, of course, play those scaling champions, because no one's going to be playing like a deep economy game where being stronger on side is going to be a big strength for you, because the macro is just not there for FNATIC and KC currently. And I think that's where the series will conclude. And I think that KC as a whole, if they can get to team fights, I think that they can beat anyone in the league. The difference is KOI and G2 don't let them get there gently. But I think with KC versus FNATIC, I think KC will get to those team fights, and I do think that execution-wise, across the board, they just have a higher ceiling in my mind. FNATIC have great players, and Upset, Mickey, Razor, these guys can pop off. I just have less faith in Oscarinin and Poby in those situations. And I think this series will end 3-2 for the Blue Wall. There's a lot of pressure, KC have not been under this pressure. They made it through the pressure in winter, right? But with the drama they've been through, with Vladi and so forth, with Niski and all that jazz, you don't know where their head is at. There's also a different type of pressure, because they are not the underdog. Now there's expectations on them, and qualification to the Worlds really puts different thoughts in your mind. But FNATIC is a dynamic that is recently formed. Poby got pulled out of Challenger to play here. It's a lot of pressure on them too. But in the end, I think this can be a very, very close series. I like the fact that Upset has played Twitch and Vayne. It means that he is willing to expand past the regular stuff and add additional, range to his champion pool, because sometimes these unique champions can be the ones to carry the game. And he's in the state of mind that he needs to carry the game, because I think this is the truth for, of course, FNATIC. But if FNATIC can get ahead through bot lane and put Upset in a very good spot to carry the game, and Razor can maintain his cool, which he hasn't in final games of his seasons in the past, then I think that FNATIC can potentially win here. But I do think that some things point towards KC victory here, and I think it's enough for me to, push the scale in the favor of KC. I would say 55-45. Very, very close series in my mind, because, I think both of these teams are very flawed. And I do think if FNATIC can pressure bot lane and then isolate Vladi and pressure him completely, and maybe activate some of the lane swap, things you can do in the game to help Oscarinin in the early game, I do think that FNATIC have good chances. But we shall see. Very exciting stuff. The next matchup will being then against MKOI. I do think that MKOI should be favored against both teams. I mentioned it already. I do think that MKOI individually is weaker than both of these teams, but I do think that they are a lot smarter and are a little bit more complete in the way they play. I think that KOI as a team are very, very good on side lane and how they play a wider game beyond the objective. It's very clear that they have international experience, which showcases through the way they play. But I do think that there's a chance that both FNATIC and KC can beat MKOI. I think MKOI is quite inconsistent in their individual performances. Sometimes, Jojo Pune can be bad. Sometimes he can be great. I do think that their individual ceilings is what is the biggest question mark. I don't know where to place them as individual players, because I do think KOI is just a the sum is greater than their parts, right? And that can be a very, very good thing against teams that are flawed. But if Fnatic and KC put things together, I do think that individually these teams are stronger. But that is a big demand, especially with all the things that I mentioned before. KOI has gone through, these international events, and they have, digested a lot, and they'll be able to create good preparation because probably Fnatic and KC will push each other. And I do think that KOI should be favored coming into that matchup. But I think the biggest, clearest thing for me is that G2 should be favored to win the finals. This has been the case in the past, but I do think that their wins are the most honest coming into this finals. I don't think there was like some unique draft shenanigans or draft traps that they put the enemy in, like an Anivia into the Sion and the Rise and the Draven and all that jazz. I think that G2 is just the most complete team in the region. And I do think that now that Labrov and Skimond are playing really, really well, and they're a part of the G2 engine that makes their macro very successful, I do think that G2 should be a giga favorite in the finals. And the main thing is if they're going to choke, just... yeah. And that is all. Those are my LEC predictions. I'm going to be live viewing the LEC. Let me know if you guys want to see any specific content. Please leave a like, leave a comment, and I will answer it if it's a question. Subscribe as well if you want to support the channel. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.